The lights in the nursery wing dimmed without warning, and for a long moment the station fell quiet. Inside the last glass enclosure, small shapes stirred. Pale bodies pressed together, thin tails twitching, eyes opening all at once. The hatchlings made no sound at first. Then one sharp cry broke the silence, and the others followed, loud and uneven, like broken alarms. Caretakers paused in the hallway but did not turn back. These hatchlings were different. Everyone knew it. Their scales were white, not the deep colors their species was known for. Their eyes reflected too much light. Their cries were harsh and restless. The data screens beside the enclosure showed warning signs in calm blue letters: low tolerance, unstable moods, poor response to care. No one said the word failure, but it hung in the air. They had hatched 3 cycles ago. From the first hour, they had been marked as trouble. Other hatchlings in nearby enclosures slept quietly or played under warm lamps. Visitors gathered around those tanks, pointing and smiling. Names were suggested. Futures were imagined. But this enclosure stayed empty. The glass was clean, the floor warm, the food fresh. Everything was correct. Still, no one stayed long. The hatchlings felt it. They pushed against each other, nipping and hissing, not from hate but from fear. When a caretaker reached in with gloved hands, the smallest hatchling snapped in panic. The caretaker pulled back at once. "See," one of them said later. "Cranky. Just like the report." After that, visits became shorter. The station was known as Haven Ring, a place built for care. Many species sent their young here when they were rare, fragile, or important. Haven Ring believed in saving life. It believed in balance and order. But it also believed in numbers and results. And these hatchlings were not producing good ones. Scientists met behind clear walls and spoke in quiet tones. Charts were shared. Comparisons were made. "Albino traits increase stress response," one said. "They do not bond properly," said another. "They reject calm signals," a third added. No one said that maybe the signals were wrong. The hatchlings grew fast. Their bodies stretched long and thin. Their scales stayed white, almost glowing under the lights. Their eyes followed every movement outside the glass. When footsteps passed, they rushed forward, then recoiled, unsure. Their cries became louder. Their behavior was marked as aggressive. Adoption requests slowed, then stopped. A record was updated. Status: unassigned. Recommendation: observe only. That night, one hatchling pressed its head against the glass and stayed there until it slept. Another curled around it, shaking. The smallest one tried to climb the smooth wall, slipping again and again. No one noticed. Caretaker Lero watched from the far end of the hall. He had worked on Haven Ring for 15 years. He had seen strange younglings, loud ones, sick ones, even dangerous ones. But these bothered him in a way he could not explain. "They are not bad," he muttered to himself. But he did not go closer. Rules were rules. Extra time was for priority cases. These hatchlings were no longer priority. The next cycle, a delegation arrived. Many species walked through the halls, their robes bright, their translators humming. They stopped at enclosure after enclosure, praising this clutch, approving that one. Laughter echoed. Data pads changed hands. When they reached the albino hatchlings, the group slowed. "What is wrong with them?" someone asked. "They are difficult," a guide replied. One of the hatchlings hissed loudly, tail striking the floor. The sound echoed. Several delegates stepped back. "Unstable," another said. "Best left alone." They moved on. The guide marked the reaction and kept walking. Inside the enclosure, the hatchlings watched the backs of the group disappear. Their cries softened into low, broken sounds. They gathered in the corner farthest from the hall, bodies pressed tight. That was when the smallest hatchling stopped moving. It lay still, breathing shallow, eyes half closed. The others nudged it, panicked. Their cries rose again, sharp and desperate. Alarms did not sound. The monitors showed stress but not enough to trigger action. The system waited. Lero saw the numbers change. His hand hovered over the console. If he called for emergency care, it would start a review. Questions would be asked. He thought of the reports. Of the labels. He lowered his hand. The smallest hatchling opened its eyes again after a long minute. It breathed faster, then steadied. The others curled around it, as if they understood something important had almost been lost. From that moment, their behavior changed again. They became louder, more restless, more alert. The system recorded it as decline. Word spread quietly among the staff. "No one wants them." They might not last. They were never meant to. The station lights dimmed again, marking the end of another cycle. The hall emptied. Doors sealed. Haven Ring went to rest. In the enclosure, the albino hatchlings stayed awake. They did not know words like rejection or probability. But they knew absence. They knew the sound of footsteps that never stopped. They knew the cold feeling of being seen and then dismissed. One hatchling lifted its head and pressed it to the glass again, as if hoping something might be on the other side this time. There was nothing. For now. But far across the station, a new transport was docking. Its passengers would arrive next cycle. Among them was someone who had never read the reports, never learned the labels, and did not know she was supposed to stay away. And the hatchlings, restless and unwanted, waited without knowing why. The doors of the nursery wing slid open with a soft hiss, and a small group of humans stepped inside. They moved differently from the other species. Their limbs were thinner, their voices higher, and they carried curiosity in the way their eyes scanned everything. Among them was a young girl named Myra. Her hair was tied back in a simple braid, and her eyes seemed to shine brighter than most of the station lights. She was quiet, watching the other hatchlings play, chirp, and crawl in their enclosures. She noticed the empty tank first. Not empty, exactly, she could see the pale shapes huddled in the corner, barely moving. She frowned and stepped closer. Other children in her group giggled and whispered. "Those ones look weird," one said. Another shivered. Their translators clicked out the words in the hatchling's language, and they sounded harsh, unfriendly. Myra did not step back. She pressed her small hand against the glass, not speaking, just looking. The hatchlings froze at first. Their wide eyes blinked in surprise. Then one of the larger ones hissed. Myra only smiled softly. She tilted her head and whispered in her own language, words the hatchlings did not understand, but her tone was calm, gentle. She held out her hand as if she wanted to touch them through the glass. A caretaker nearby shook his head. "Stay back," he said to the girl. "They are not for interaction." But Myra did not move. She looked up at him with wide, steady eyes. "I just want to be their friend," she said plainly. She spoke slowly, clearly, as if she thought the caretaker might understand her sincerity. He hesitated, then stepped aside. The hatchlings watched her. They had been ignored for all their short lives. No one had come close. No one had tried to see past their white scales or angry cries. Myra's presence was different. There was no fear, no judgment. She did not flinch when they hissed. She did not frown at their small bites. She only stayed. The smallest hatchling crept forward first, testing the edge of the glass. Myra leaned closer, lowering her face so her eyes were level with its own. She whispered again, soft words that were meaningless to the sensors, meaningless to the monitors, but somehow meaningful to the hatchling. Its tail twitched. Its small claws tapped against the smooth floor. It had never felt this before, a feeling that was neither fear nor anger. Myra visited every day. She brought small gifts she had collected from her transport, soft fabrics, shapes made of glowing threads, and tiny sounds that hummed like music. She placed them near the enclosure, letting the hatchlings explore them. At first, they were suspicious. They hissed, snapped, and ran in circles. But Myra never pulled away. She only watched and waited. Other caretakers began to notice. Some shook their heads. "She's wasting her time," they said. "They won't respond to humans. They never do." But Myra did not care. She was patient in a way the machines could not understand. She spoke to them, sang to them, read aloud from her small book, telling stories of distant stars and quiet forests on Earth, places the hatchlings could not imagine. She did not try to force them. She only showed she would stay. Slowly, small changes began. The largest hatchling, once aggressive, would now stop hissing when Myra approached. The smallest one, which had nearly stopped moving in the previous cycle, began creeping toward her gifts, touching them with tiny claws, then backing away. The middle hatchlings observed quietly, curious. One morning, a strange thing happened. The hatchlings gathered together, closer than ever, and one by one, they approached the side of the enclosure where Myra sat today. They sniffed the air around her, touched her hand with tentative claws pressed against the glass. They hissed softly, not with anger, but with something closer to question. Myra tilted her head, smiling. She reached out, and for the first time, she heard the smallest hatchling make a sound that almost resembled a chirp, not a cry of distress. It was progress. The monitors recorded it. The caretakers were confused. Behavior logs changed. The hatchlings were supposed to be hostile, unstable, impossible to train. Yet, The data now showed a measurable drop in aggression whenever Myra was nearby. They responded to her presence in ways the advanced sensors could not fully explain. Myra did not notice the logs. She only noticed the hatchlings' eyes brightening, their tails twitching less anxiously. She noticed them leaning toward her voice, curling around each other instead of hissing at the world. For her, the changes were simple. They were learning to trust, because she did not give up. Soon, other children in the human group began to watch her, curious. "Why do you stay with them?" one asked. Myra shrugged. "They are alone," she said. "I don't want them to be alone." It was such a simple idea that even the adults paused. They had been looking for failure, for proof that these hatchlings were unwanted. They had found it in the reports, in the records, in every observation. But here was a child who ignored all of it. She only saw what they had missed, the hatchlings' need for care, for attention, for someone who would not run away. By the end of the cycle, something remarkable had happened. The hatchlings, who had hissed and snapped at every visitor, now allowed Myra to move along the enclosure freely. They followed her voice, imitated small movements, and even touched her hand without retreating. The other caretakers exchanged worried glances. "What is she doing to them?" one whispered. "This isn't supposed to happen." Myra only smiled at the hatchlings. She did not know the rules, did not know the expectations, did not know she was breaking protocols by simply staying. She only knew she had found friends who had been left behind. And in the nursery wing, the albino hatchlings had, for the first time, someone who did not step back. Someone who would not leave. Someone who believed they could be loved. They did not know what a human girl was. They did not know why she stayed. But they felt it. And it was enough. The station lights dimmed for the night, and Myra pressed her hand one last time against the glass before leaving. The hatchlings watched her go, tails curled, eyes bright. For the first time in their short lives, they were not alone. And far across the hall, the monitors recorded a data point that no one in the station had expected: trust growing where none had existed before. The quiet in the nursery felt different that night. Not empty. Not ignored. It felt like a beginning. Myra returned to the nursery every day. She did not bring anyone with her at first. She did not care about the warnings, the labels, or the curious glances from the other children. She only cared about the hatchlings. She watched them, listened to their small chirps, and tried to understand them in her own way. The hatchlings had started to recognize her. They would move closer when they heard her footsteps. Their cries became softer. The hiss of fear faded into tiny clicks, the language of curiosity. Other caretakers noticed the changes and whispered among themselves. "They shouldn't respond like this," one said. "Our protocols say these hatchlings are not capable of bonding." But Myra ignored them. She did not look at the charts or the logs. She only looked at the hatchlings' eyes. To her, they were not strange or broken. They were scared, and that was all. Every day she sat by the glass, talking in quiet, gentle tones. Sometimes she hummed a song she had learned on her home planet. The soft vibrations carried through the glass and the hatchlings leaned toward it, listening. One of the hatchlings, the largest, used to snap at anyone who came near. Now it stayed at the edge of the enclosure, watching Myra carefully. Another, smaller and quieter, started to mimic her movements. If Myra raised her hand, it lifted a claw. If she tilted her head, it tilted its small body in the same way. The smallest hatchling, the one that had nearly stopped moving, now approached the gifts Myra left every day. It sniffed them, touched them, and then looked back at her as if asking for permission. The other caretakers grew more confused. Sensors were showing unexpected results. The hatchling's stress levels had dropped. Aggressive incidents were fewer. Behavioral patterns did not match any known data. A council of scientists gathered to review the monitors. "They are responding to the human child," one said. "This is not supposed to happen. They should reject her." "Perhaps it is a fluke," another said. "Maybe one hatchling is curious. But all of them? That is unlikely." Myra, of course, was unaware of the debate. She only knew the hatchlings were learning to trust. She started small games, simple interactions she invented herself. She made soft shapes with her hands, letting them follow her fingers along the glass. She drew patterns in the dust of the floor and watched the hatchlings mimic them. Sometimes she read from her book, letting the words fall gently. Even if the hatchlings did not understand the meaning, they listened. A week later, one hatchling made a sound that surprised everyone. It was a small chirp, different from its cries of fear. Myra's face lit up. She whispered encouragement, and another hatchling copied the sound. Soon, tiny, happy clicks filled the enclosure. They had never communicated like this before. Lero, the caretaker who had quietly observed the hatchlings since their first day, shook his head. No machine could have done this, he muttered to himself. No training protocol. She is teaching them something we cannot. Myra did not think of herself as teaching. She only thought of herself as staying. But the result was clear. The hatchlings were changing. Their nervous energy was no longer destructive. They were calm, alert, and beginning to play. For the first time, they were not only surviving, they were beginning to grow in ways no one had expected. Some of the other humans began to notice her patience. One of her peers asked, "Why do you stay with them? They are so strange." "They are alone," Myra replied. "And they need someone. That is all." She did not explain that other species had already given up. She did not explain that the monitors had warned that the hatchlings would never bond. She only explained the truth she understood, that being seen, being heard, being cared for, made a difference. The scientists tried to replicate it. They used recordings of Myra's voice. They projected holograms of her gestures. The hatchlings reacted slightly, but not like they did when she was there in person. Something about her presence could not be copied. Something about humans, perhaps, that the other species had not noticed. Slowly, it became obvious. The hatchlings were empathic in ways the machines could not measure. They responded to attention, to emotion, to kindness. They had not been cranky or broken. They had been waiting for someone to care enough to stay. Myra noticed small details that the monitors missed. One hatchling would mimic her breathing. Another would lean against her hand when she hummed softly. The smallest hatchling now curled next to her gifts, relaxing completely. The other hatchlings watched it all, learning from each other. They were curious, playful, and cautious all at once. By the end of the month, the hatchlings did something remarkable. They began to approach her without hesitation. They chirped, clicked, and even nudged the glass toward her hand. They allowed her to move along the enclosure freely. They had learned to trust, to respond, and to show small signs of joy. The other species began to take notice. Delegates stopped to watch Myra and the hatchlings. "Why does she succeed where our protocols fail?" one asked. The answer was simple, but no one had considered it. She saw what others did not. She saw need instead of defect. She saw life instead of problem. Lero, still observing quietly, finally said aloud, "Humans, they understand things differently. They see what machines cannot. They see what others refuse to see." Myra smiled at the hatchlings and spoke softly. "You're not alone anymore," she said. For the hatchlings, the words were meaningless, but the tone carried warmth. They responded instinctively, tails curling, bodies pressing close together. The monitors continued to record. Stress levels dropped. Social behavior increased. Patterns emerged that no one had expected. Data analysts scratched their heads. They had always looked at numbers, reports, and labels. They had never looked at the heart of the matter. And that was what Myra saw. She did not see labels. She did not see warnings. She only saw the hatchlings, waiting for someone to stay. And in staying, she changed everything. The nursery felt different now. No longer was it a place of failure. It was a place of possibility. The albino hatchlings, once rejected by everyone, had begun to bloom. And all it took was a human girl who refused to step back. Even the smallest hatchling, the one who had almost stopped moving, now chirped happily as Myra hummed. The largest stretched its claws toward her hand, gentle for the first time. They were learning, growing, and thriving. The galaxy had labeled them unwanted, but Myra had seen the truth. They were just waiting. Waiting for someone to care enough to notice what others missed. And for the first time, they were not waiting alone. The nursery wing smelled faintly of warmth and soft fabrics. Myra stepped inside, carrying her small bundle of gifts for the hatchlings. She did not know why, but she felt excitement that day. Something was different. The hatchlings waited, their pale bodies pressed together near the glass. Their eyes followed her every movement, tails flicking in small, precise motions. From the moment she arrived, they approached without hesitation. The smallest hatchling, once shy and trembling, moved first. It tapped the glass with a tiny claw and chirped. Myra smiled, kneeling down so her face was level with theirs. "Good morning," she whispered. The sound of her voice made them lean closer. For the first time, the hatchlings did not scatter when anyone else entered the room. Even other human children, who had been watching from a distance, noticed the difference. The hatchlings were calm. They were alert. They were ready. Myra placed her gifts on the floor. The largest hatchling approached cautiously, sniffing the glowing threads and soft fabrics. Then, without warning, it nudged a small piece toward Myra. She reached out and touched it gently, letting the hatchling see she accepted the gesture. The others followed. Each hatchling offered something, a tiny stick, a curled piece of soft fabric, even a chirp, and Myra responded in the same gentle way. The change had not happened all at once. It had taken weeks. But now, the hatchlings were no longer waiting for permission. They were choosing Myra. They followed her movements, mimicked her sounds, and even began nudging each other toward her, as if teaching one another that she was safe. The caretakers watched in disbelief. "They never do this," one whispered. "They never choose one being over the others." Lero, who had been quietly observing from the far end of the hall, only shook his head. "Humans, they reach parts of life we cannot touch," he muttered. He had spent years caring for younglings of every species, but he had never seen this. He had never seen a being so rejected by everyone learn to trust and choose one individual. The hatchlings began small games. They chased each other, tapped their claws against the soft mats, and explored the room. But every time Myra moved or spoke, they paused and watched her carefully. They returned to her side when she hummed or made a gesture. Their trust was growing, and with it, their bond. One moment stood out clearly. The smallest hatchling, the one who had almost stopped moving months ago, climbed gently to the edge of the enclosure and pressed its head against Myra's hand. She leaned closer, whispering softly. The hatchling stayed there, still and calm, letting her touch it. The others gathered around, tails curled, forming a protective circle. It was a silent choice. They had accepted her. The monitors recorded unusual patterns. Emotional responses were higher than expected. Bonding behavior had reached levels previously thought impossible for this species. The scientists scratched their notes, trying to understand how one human child had achieved what advanced training, technology, and years of observation had not. Myra did not notice the data. She only noticed the hatchlings' eyes, bright and focused, their bodies relaxed but alert. She saw them choose her freely, not because she commanded it, not because she had tools or authority, but because she stayed. Because she cared. Other species began to take interest. Delegates who had previously ignored the enclosure now stopped and watched quietly. Some approached slowly, curious. The hatchlings did not respond the same way to them. They hissed softly, tapped claws, and retreated. Myra's presence had become their safe center. They had chosen her, and no one else. It was a lesson no report could capture. The hatchlings were not broken. They were not defective. They were waiting for someone who could see past their differences, someone willing to stay. And that someone was Myra. The girl spent hours in the nursery, not counting time. She taught them simple games of mimicry and observation. She sang, hummed, and even made up small songs just for them. They responded with chirps, clicks, and gentle nudges. The hatchlings learned quickly. The largest one even began following her hand gestures with precise movements, as if understanding that her actions meant safety. Soon, the hatchlings did something even more surprising. They began to cooperate with one another in ways never seen before. The largest would guide the smaller ones toward Myra's hand or gifts. They would nudge each other gently and chirp softly, as if teaching one another the rules she had shown them. It was not just a bond with Myra. It was a bond they created among themselves. Lero finally said aloud, amazed, "They have chosen. Not just to trust her, but to follow her guidance. They understand connection in a way we cannot measure." Myra smiled quietly, unaware of how important her presence had become. She only noticed the hatchlings leaning toward her, their chirps happy and calm, their tails relaxed. She saw them curling around each other, resting together, yet always attentive to her voice. She felt the warmth of their trust like a quiet light in the cold metal of the station. By the end of that day, the nursery was no longer a place of failure. The hatchlings had chosen to accept life, to explore safely, and to form bonds. All because one human girl had stayed when everyone else had walked away. The monitors continued to record, and the scientists continued to analyze. They could measure stress, movement, and response, but not the choice itself. They could see patterns but could not understand the reason behind them. Only Myra, with her quiet patience and care, had unlocked the secret. That connection cannot be forced, it must be chosen. The hatchlings, once abandoned and rejected, had made their choice. They had picked a friend. They had chosen life. And in doing so, they had shown the galaxy something important, that even the most unwanted can find someone who believes in them. When Myra left the nursery that night, the hatchlings pressed close to the glass, following her figure until she disappeared from view. For the first time, they were not alone. They had made their choice. And it had changed everything. In that quiet moment, the station seemed different. Not colder, not more mechanical, but alive in a new way. The albino hatchlings had chosen to trust, to connect, and to follow. And the galaxy, for once, had no choice but to notice. The nursery wing was quiet, but it felt alive in a new way. The albino hatchlings slept close together, their small bodies curled and calm. Myra knelt beside the glass, watching them breathe. She had stayed every day for weeks, and the hatchlings had finally chosen her. Their trust was complete. Their fear was gone. They had found someone who would not leave. News of the human girl's success spread slowly through Haven Ring. First, the caretakers noticed. Then the scientists. Finally, the council itself took interest. Reports were rewritten, charts corrected, and monitors examined more closely. The hatchlings, once labeled as unwanted and unstable, were now being called empathically bonded. The word was new. It had no true definition yet, but it meant something important. These young creatures were capable of deep connection, and only a human had unlocked it. Delegates from many species visited the nursery. They whispered to one another, pointing to the hatchlings and Myra. How did a human child do what we could not? One asked. Our technology, our protocols, our years of experience, it was useless. Myra, unaware of the discussions, only smiled at the hatchlings. She offered her hand, and the smallest one climbed to it carefully. Another nuzzled against her arm. She spoke softly in her own language, telling them that it was okay, that they were safe, that they were seen. To her, this was simple. To the galaxy, it was extraordinary. Scientists began to analyze the situation. They tried to measure empathy, patience, and attention. They used monitors, sensors, and even artificial intelligence to replicate Myra's presence. Nothing worked. The hatchlings responded only to her. They followed her voice, her gestures, her simple care. They had learned to trust one being in a universe that had rejected them. The Council of Haven Ring gathered in the main hall. Holoscreens displayed the hatchlings' progress. Charts showed lowered stress, increased social interaction, and unexpected signs of intelligence. The council members debated, whispered, and recorded notes. Finally, one of the elder members said aloud, "The humans have a unique ability. They see life differently. They see potential where we see failure. They reach beings we cannot. These hatchlings are proof." Myra, still in the nursery, did not hear the words. She only noticed the hatchlings' movements, their tiny chirps, their soft clicks of communication. They had chosen her. That simple truth was enough. Over time, the hatchlings began interacting with other humans from Myra's group. They approached cautiously at first but responded when the humans spoke gently and moved slowly. It became clear that humans had a unique ability to connect, to reach out where others could not. Other species could offer food, warmth, or technology, but humans could offer attention, patience, and belief. That belief made the difference. The hatchlings, once rejected, now played freely with Myra. They explored the enclosure together, followed her gestures, and even imitated some of her actions. When she hummed a new song, they clicked and chirped in response, creating a small harmony. The sound was faint but beautiful, a sign of trust and connection that no data chart could measure. News spread beyond Haven Ring. Ships from other star systems arrived to study the albino hatchlings and the human child who had helped them. Delegates asked questions, recorded observations, and tried to understand. Yet the answer remained the same: a human had seen what no one else had. The council made a decision. The hatchlings would remain in the nursery under Myra's guidance whenever possible. They would be studied, yes, but not forced to act beyond their comfort. Rules were rewritten. Policies adjusted. The galaxy had learned an important lesson. Connection is not measured in strength, speed, or obedience. Connection is chosen, and humans have a special gift for choice and patience. Myra did not know she was making history. She only knew the hatchlings were alive, safe, and happy. She played with them, sang to them, and let them explore. In return, they taught her about trust, empathy, and the quiet power of care. One day, as Myra hummed softly, the hatchlings chirped back, forming tiny patterns of sound. They climbed gently onto her hands, pressed their heads against her arms, and even nudged each other closer. It was a small chorus, but it carried a message. They had chosen life. They had chosen trust. They had chosen her. The scientists and council members finally understood what Myra had known all along. The galaxy had judged these hatchlings by what they could not do. Myra had judged them by what they could become. That simple act of seeing potential, of staying when everyone else walked away, had changed everything. The human child, small and ordinary in appearance, became extraordinary in impact. Hatchlings thrived, policies shifted, and the galaxy began to look at humans differently. They were no longer just newcomers or observers. They were connectors, builders, and teachers. Their gift was subtle, quiet, and powerful. In the nursery, the albino hatchlings chirped happily as Myra leaned down to stroke one of their soft scales. They had learned to trust her completely. They had chosen her over all else. And in doing so, they had shown the galaxy that patience, care, and the willingness to stay can change the fate of those others have given up on. The story spread from system to system, from planet to planet. Humans were now seen as a species that could reach the unreachable, care for the uncared for, and bring life where others had given up hope. The albino hatchlings were no longer unwanted. They were symbols of connection, proof of what could happen when someone refuses to step back. Myra, unaware of her fame, simply smiled. She sat beside the enclosure, humming a quiet tune, watching her friends explore, climb, and chirp. She did not need recognition. She did not need rewards. She only needed them. And they only needed her. The galaxy had learned about humans. It had learned about patience, empathy, and the power of a single choice. But Myra had learned something too, that even the smallest acts of care can make the biggest difference. That even beings rejected by the universe can find hope. That trust, once given and returned, changes everything. In the quiet of the nursery wing, the albino hatchlings curled around each other and Myra. Their pale scales glowed faintly under the soft lights. Their chirps, clicks, and hums formed a tiny melody, a song of trust and friendship. And for the first time, they were truly home. The galaxy watched, and it learned.